Great. Okay, today is Friday, February 28th, 2025, and this is Stephen Theccanat representing the City of Savannah's Municipal Archives as a volunteer from the Learning Center, Senior Citizens Incorporated. I'm interviewing
Bob Matyjasik. Spelling is Matyjasik.
Very good, thank you. For the Everyone Has a Story project through the Savannah Community Memory Project. We are conducting this interview at Bob's house, so thank you for joining me today. So maybe we could start by just tell me a little bit about whatever your background, like where were you born, just a little bit about that.
Okay. Born in Buffalo, New York, and that's where I grew up until the age of 20. I went through schools in the Buffalo area, first in the city of Buffalo up to the end of first grade. Then my parents had been living actually above my grandparents' store. My grandparents had what you'd consider now a convenience store in Buffalo, in the city. And it was on a corner of a busy street. In fact, I remember streetcars going up and down Broadway and watching the sparks on the wires. But when I was, I think, 9 years old, we moved to Depew, New York, and I grew up the rest of the time there. Attended Catholic schools, Catholic high school, and then went to Canisius College in Buffalo for 2 years, my first 2 years. I was very interested in becoming an automotive engineer. And like many young guys at that time, I loved cars and working on cars. And so my dream was an automotive engineer. My high school counselor recommended that, since it was a Catholic school, I was attending for high school. Counselor recommended, go to Canisius College in Buffalo, a Jesuit school. You'll get your 2 years of liberal arts education and then transfer to the University of Detroit, another Jesuit school. And this is, a lot of the Jesuit universities do this. The smaller ones will feed the larger universities. So I did 2 years of liberal arts at Canisius College, transferred to the University of Detroit for a degree in mechanical engineering.
Okay.
Excuse me. I just swallowed something.
That's okay. You're okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what was it like growing up? You said in Buffalo, New York. Tell me a little bit about your family structure, your parents, what did they do? It was interesting. The first few years we lived, as I said, above my grandparents' convenience store. They had a house attached in the back of the store, and we lived in an apartment up above until my parents could afford to buy their first home and moved out to the suburbs. So I grew up actually in the city, only to the age of 9. I do remember only by a story that at one point my parents bought me a dog. Me and my brother, I had a brother 2 years younger, by the way. They bought us a dog, and it only lasted a week or so and was killed by a car or a streetcar or something. So that didn't last, but that's my memories of the city. I do have other memories of being in the city, though. We used to walk down the side street to an area that we considered a park, but it was actually where the railroad came through. So there was some open land, and that's where we would play on big concrete structures. And I don't think our parents knew that we were playing there, but those are my memories of being in the city. When we moved out to the suburbs, we could walk to school, my brother and I. So I had this one, my closest brother was 2 years younger. Then 9 years after I was born, my parents had another boy, Peter, And then about 3 years after that, so 12 years younger than me, they finally had a girl, which I think they'd been hoping, my mother had been hoping for a girl. So I was raised in essentially two small families. My younger brother, Ed, 2 years younger, and then these younger children came much later. So it was almost as though we were two different families. I think my sister was maybe 7 or 8 years old when I moved out of the house and moved to Detroit.
Okay.
So growing up in Buffalo, I do remember the city life. I remember things like there would be, that we didn't see in the suburbs, a man would come around with a horse-drawn cart, a large cart, collecting rags and newspapers. And he would collect these things and take them somewhere to be recycled, and apparently it was a job. He would go through the neighborhood calling out rags, rags, rags. He was the rag man.
Amazing.
And if you had things, you could bring out rags and newspapers, and he would take them and, I guess, got pennies for them, or somehow they got recycled. So that was a city life, I remember. And then the suburban life was much more suburban.
What did your parents do?
My dad worked for the Buffalo Evening News. He was originally, or at least at the beginning of his career, in the paper handling, or called the Paper Handlers Union. They were the laborers who would bring the papers in off of rail cars. They had machinery to do this, bring the big rolls of newsprint, load it into the presses, and they had to know that part of the process. Later in his career, he became a floor supervisor, I guess, more into supervision than actual manual labor. My mom worked a number of different jobs. I do remember she worked when I was very small at a furniture store, I guess doing retail sales, and then later years she worked at a government, it was sort of like a government exchange store, kind of like Sam's Club or something like that, called, I think, GEX, Government Employee Exchange. And again, probably doing retail. And then in her later years, she worked at a retirement home. And I think she really enjoyed that the most of all of her careers, working with the elderly people, and she just had a big heart. And that seems to be that was her final career, because she died young. She died at 62.
Wow, that's very young.
Cerebral aneurysm. And my dad didn't last much longer. He lived to be 68, died of lung cancer. The other thing I remember about Buffalo is snow, a lot of snow. It's the, being at the east end of Lake Erie, it gets what they call lake effect snow, and the winds come across the lake from west to east and pick up moisture and dump it all in Buffalo.
Wow. Why was Buffalo the place? Like, was your father also born there, or?
My father was born in, both parents were born in Buffalo. My grandparents were all immigrants from Poland in probably the early 20th century, 1920 and later. I don't know the exact years, but so my parents were born in Buffalo. My dad had two brothers, older brothers, who had been born in Poland and moved to the country with his parents. Interesting thing is that my mother's parents came to this country and wanted to adapt very quickly. I don't know how long it took them to learn English, but they insisted on speaking English in the home, and they adapted very quickly. My dad's parents may have been possibly older when they came to the country. My dad's parents never learned English. So they spoke only Polish. So my parents learned both Polish and English. But when it got to my generation, they didn't teach us Polish.
Okay.
They reserved Polish to themselves as their secret language, and I knew they were always talking about Christmas gifts or birthday gifts or making plans that they didn't want us to know of, or they were telling jokes. I couldn't understand it.
I see.
I didn't understand Polish.
Okay.
So they kept it as their secret language,
Wow.
and I kind of regret that a little bit.
Because because you didn't learn. You could have learned a different language.
I tried to learn some Polish many years later.
Yeah.
Eileen and I took a trip to Poland,
Uh-huh.
I think in 1996 maybe,
Mhm.
and I tried to learn some, and I could learn very little, but I did learn some, only well enough that I think I had good pronunciation, and if I spoke to someone in Poland, they would immediately think that I could speak the language,
Wow.
and they'd start speaking to me in Polish, and then I had to explain what Polish I knew. I'm not a Polish speaker.
Yeah. Right.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Yes.
But it was a great experience, and it helped me learn something about immigration, what it must have been like for my grandparents to come to this country and not know the language and have to learn it. And of course, that's where people would settle in ghettos.
Yeah.
My dad's parents stayed in an area that was far more Polish speaking. My mom's parents ended up buying this convenience store in a largely Polish neighborhood, but because they could speak English, they could transact business in English and Polish because a lot of their suppliers were English speakers. And so it was just an interesting experience in cultural mergers.
So it sounds like some of the kids growing up in that neighborhood also had Polish parents, but they did not speak Polish. Like your friends probably in Buffalo.
Of my friends, because the families were of different degrees of acculturation, some of my friends could speak Polish. Some could not. A good friend from college was raised in a Polish family in New Jersey, and he went to a Polish Catholic school, and they had Polish lessons in school. Now, the neighborhood I was in Buffalo, there were two Catholic parishes. One was a Polish-speaking Catholic parish. The other one was culturally Polish and Catholic, but English-speaking. So we were members of the English-speaking parish. My other grandparents were members of the Polish-speaking parents. So, and these two Catholic parishes were maybe 3 blocks from each other.
Amazing.
So different families would be at different levels of cultural merger.
Right. Okay. Very good. And then, so you finished college, and then you got an engineering degree from the University of Detroit.
Yes.
Correct? So then you worked in what capacity?
I graduated in 1969.
Okay.
The Vietnam War was still very active at the time, and I had gone through ROTC started at Canisius College because it was mandatory for the first 2 years. Mandatory only because it was considered your physical education, because we did marching and things. Then when I transferred to Detroit, because the draft was still going on, and even student deferments were not guaranteed, so I continued in ROTC at Detroit. But I had started an Army ROTC at Detroit. I could join Air Force ROTC. And my father had been in the Army in World War II. And of course, he was a sergeant, non-commissioned officer, and he'd always given me advice to work with your brain, not with your back. You'll last much longer. And the same thing about military career. Become an officer. You won't be killed. So when I joined Air Force ROTC, the idea was, well, I'm not going to be drafted because I'm already in the program. And the Air Force was a much safer way to go if I should even be sent to Vietnam. And I wasn't. I was sent to Oklahoma City. And Eileen and I got married. We got married just after I was commissioned, after my graduation, and sent to Oklahoma City to an Air Force base. And I was doing engineering for the Air Force in aircraft. It was aircraft mechanical engineering. Because it was a service base, it was like a repair shop for aircraft. So I was in service engineering, which meant analyzing equipment failures and trying to help design fixes and tooling and things like that. So I did that for about 3 years. Then when I got out of the Air Force, just as Vietnam was winding down, they actually had a program, 1972. They said anybody I had a 4-year commitment, but they said anyone who wants to leave early, we're taking volunteers. So I volunteered to leave early. We moved back to Detroit, and I got a job with Ford Motor Company.
Also as an engineer.
So now into automotive engineering, which was my dream job from high school. Although I was in light truck design, which nowadays would be very popular because it was the F-150, and now a very popular vehicle. So I had that job, but the interesting thing is, even while we were in Oklahoma, the engineering job I did was not terribly demanding. It was basically a 9 to 5 job. And most of the young officers were going to night school. Most of my friends were going for a master's in business. They were engineers deciding, well, we'll get a master's MBA and enjoy an engineering business degree. And I decided to try law school instead because I'd had some experiences in engineering school in 2 classes that dealt with law. One of them was, what was it called? Contracts and specifications for engineers, taught by a lawyer. And they taught in a, what do they call it? I don't remember the term, not Homeric or something, teaching style where we actually read legal cases and the instructor would draw the principles out of those cases, and we had to learn how to do that. So I found taking a law course interesting in engineering school, and it was so different from engineering because, of course, in engineering everything was precise. You had to know how to solve a problem. You had to show your work and arrive at the correct answer and do it the correct way. In law, it was so much more ambiguous and loose, and it was about logic and reasoning, and your logic might go in a path in one direction, and there was no precisely right or wrong answer. So I thought that was interesting, so I decided to go to law school.
How many years at Ford did you do?
Actually, I started while we were in Oklahoma City. I went to night school at Oklahoma City University. I think I did 1 year there. Then, as soon as I got the job at Ford Motor Company, I applied to the Detroit College of Law and continued my night school even while I was doing engineering in the daytime.
Good for you.
It was just an interesting thing. So I did engineering during the day at Ford Motor Company. I would drive, that was in Dearborn, I would drive into the city of Detroit and attend law school at night and finish that degree. I think it took 2 more years.
Wow.
to finish the degree at night.
And just doing it at night. Wow.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you finished, did you just stop engineering and move to law?
Well, I did. Yeah. I of course couldn't wait to get into a legal job, seeing that as a more interesting career path. Because I found out that in the corporate life in engineering was very, very structured. I mean, I worked on a very, very small part of the F-Series pickup trucks and Econoline vans, and I was in suspension group, and I was working on springs and spring brackets, and so you'd become so specialized that automotive engineering wasn't what I dreamed of being a designer and making beautiful cars for people to drive. I was working on springs and brackets. So I thought that law would be a more interesting career, and so I couldn't wait to get a job. And I got one right after law school. Let's see, I passed the bar exam in Michigan. I learned of that in October of '75. And then started interviewing and got a job with a law firm in Saginaw, Michigan, starting in January of '76.
And what was your role initially?
They hired me because they were a personal injury type of firm. They did medical malpractice, auto accidents, and things like that, and product liability. So they wanted someone, and I became... My job, I interpret my job as being a translator or an interpreter between engineering discipline and common life or common language.
Interesting.
And it was a rather good time.
Wow. So it was mainly product liability or even
Product
medical
liability.
parts?
It was pretty much all product liability.
Wow.
I worked on cases involving injuries involving machinery, big factory machinery or farm machinery, and they were interesting. Failure of products.
Wow, that's a perfect fit almost for you.
Well, it was a good fit, and there were some perhaps I had I don't want to say a more integrity, but there are parts about being a lawyer that I found to be less integrated with my sense of right and wrong. There are always lawyers have a lot of power, and you have a power to convince your client that, well, we're going to continue this case. We can continue this case. We can get more money. Let's go to trial. When maybe it's not the best thing for the client. And there are these moral judgments that have to be made. And I didn't enjoy that part of it.
You had to just go along with it?
Yeah, pretty much, because I was a junior attorney. I wasn't making decisions, and I just had a feeling that, and perhaps I'm not cut out to be a trial lawyer, because the trial lawyers want to get into the courtroom. They want to do the battle. They want to get in there and win the case.
Okay.
And maybe because of it's my engineering background, I think of risk-benefit analysis. And I'm always considering, well, wait a minute. We're at this point now, we could settle this case at this level or try for more. The trial lawyers are more like thoroughbreds. They want to get in the race. They want to get there. And I'm more of a risk-benefit analyzer. So I'd be more inclined to counsel my clients. And maybe for that reason, it wasn't a good fit for me.
Okay. So if they refuse, you would actually go to trial?
No. If the client refused to
if they agreed, they said go ahead.
If they agree,
then you would represent
but that's
them?
where the lawyer has so much power, because you have knowledge, you have authority, you have the clients are respecting your judgment.
Correct.
And if I would tell them no, I think we should go to trial, they would believe me.
And then you would represent them in court.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the part you didn't like, being
I didn't like that moral dilemma.
the dilemma part.
Because there were some times when I felt like, this isn't. Later years, we left Saginaw, Michigan, and moved to Cleveland, and I still worked as a lawyer.
But a different firm, right? So
A different firm, and it was a situation where I was really in total control of the attorney-client relationship.
very good.
And
How did that change? Like because you became a partner? Or?
well, no, I was again an associate with other attorneys, and it was more of an office sharing arrangement where I had my own clientele, they had theirs. Sometimes I would get referrals, but it was my judgment.
Yes.
I was the only one making judgment on cases.
Okay.
And I think I tended perhaps to be a little more cautious than the typical trial attorney would be. I'd say, well, look, we're at this level now. We can go to trial, and you might end up with nothing.
Wow.
Or you can take this, or we might do better.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there were still cases that I felt like, no, their offer is much too low. Let's go to trial. And luckily, I'd be successful most of the time.
Good.
But there are those times when you're not successful.
Correct. Can't win every battle.
And and those are difficult times. So I tended to then start looking for something different. And my wife was working for the county government as a teacher, and she said, you should look into that, getting a job with the county. So I did. I went and interviewed with the county prosecutor, who was a woman I'd already known because she had been a judge.
Oh.
The judges were elected, county prosecutors elected, and I interviewed with her, and I said, I'd like to come and work in your office. She said, well, be glad to have you. So she found me a place, and so I went to work in now this is it's called the county prosecutor's office, but it's here we'd call it the district attorney. She represented all the county officers civilly, and also her office handled criminal cases. But I was in the civil division, so I represented a government township, and I'd go to their township meetings and give them advice on governing the township, representing the county, and even for example, the Cleveland Public Library in construction, a large 10-story addition, and as soon as they dig the hole in the ground and water starts coming in, and this contractor says, wait a minute, we didn't anticipate that, we need more money, and then every other contractor says, you're holding me up and we need more money, and big construction problems end up being in court. So, but I found that to be somewhere where I was on firm footing, where I understood the engineering concepts, I understood the legal concepts, and it was representing the city or the county in a claims involving money rather than involving someone's only chance at a personal recovery.
Wow. Huh.
So
and how long did you do that for?
So I did that maybe about 5 or 6 years, and then within the county I then transferred to the Human Resources Department to do employment law, because I'd come across some of that in the county prosecutor's office, and by transferring to another office I could be one of 3 lawyers in the office rather than being one of 300.
Wow.
So it was a much smaller office, and once again I got to be much more personally in control of the work I was doing.
Okay.
So I found that to be interesting, and employment law is an interesting area as well.
Wow. So you've been varied experiences within law.
Yeah.
Wow. Is that what you retired from finally?
Yes, I retired from that, and when we moved to Savannah, I was only 63 because of this. what did they call it, the Great Recession in 2008 and 9. Retired early because they gave me a wonderful retirement package, and I then took a contract with the federal government, EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, as an administrative judge.
Here?
Here.
Oh.
And I worked from home.
Oh, wow.
And most of it, well, all of it, ended up being all work out of my home. We would just exchange briefs and papers. In the earliest days, I would get a large package of paper. And then as technology, this was, what was that, 2010 mostly? Then they started sending me just a CD, a disc.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we were still working on disc when I finally retired from that job.
How long was that?
It was about 10 years.
Wow.
And I enjoyed the work. I would do maybe just 2 or 3 cases a year. But unfortunately, because we were otherwise retired and it was part-time work,
Okay.
it seems like every time we went on vacation, something was happening in one of my cases, so I'd have to take a laptop with me, and we'd be on vacation in California or somewhere else, and I'd have to do a couple hours of work each day.
I see.
You know, so it just got to be an annoyance rather than a reward.
Wow. So you basically ended around the COVID time, 2020? 10
Yes,
years?
let me think. Yeah, right around 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't remember exactly when my last case was, but because it was all done remotely, ultimately some of these cases may have ended up in actually conducting a hearing.
Okay.
I never had one that went that far because in every legal case, of course, I was working, there would be, because this was equal employment opportunities, these were cases of discrimination, employment discrimination. And so the employee would always have an attorney. The government was represented by the Department of Justice. And very often, as cases progressed, the lawyers would talk to each other and ultimately they might resolve the case. And it was over for me. Or every case ends up, especially civil cases like that, both sides file motions for summary judgment, that is to decide the case based on the papers and the evidence available on paper. And some of those I would find, yes, the case should go further or the case should end here because it was not sufficient. So I never had one go to an actual hearing. I'd hoped that some would. I had cases in Chicago, cases in the southern states, only one case in Savannah, but I was sort of a regional lawyer. But I was outside of the department. I was not an employee. I was an outside attorney contacted by the EEOC.
Okay. So what brought you to Savannah?
We came to Savannah really because our first grandchild was born here. Our oldest daughter, attended the Savannah College of Art and Design, got her master's in fine art. She stayed on to work for the school, and I think she was doing like exhibit coordination where she was traveling. She's a furniture designer in the furniture design department and traveling like to Chicago or New York or even Milan, organizing and organizing the movement and exhibition of furniture design presentations for the college. So she did that for a while, and then she became a faculty member. She had her first child 16 years ago, and we moved here then when he was a year old, which was right about the time that Eileen and I had received our early retirement options from the county government, and it was a very convenient situation for us
Very good.
to retire at a relatively young age.
But you're still working part-time, but you also were able to spend time with your grandchild.
Yeah.
At that time.
Yeah, when we came here, that's the reason we came here is because that was the first grandchild. We decided, number one, all of our children had left the Cleveland area.
Mm-hmm.
We still had some family there, but we had a daughter here in Savannah. The other two children were in other parts of the country. This was the first grandchild. We intended to be grandparents much like our parents had been to us.
Mm-hmm.
Where when we lived in Cleveland, Eileen's parents were the daycare after-school center for our children growing up.
Wow.
So it was just that sort of maybe a family tradition, or just what
back.
families do.
Correct.
In our experience,
Right.
grandparents are there for their grandchildren.
Wow. How would you see this part of your life compared to the previous parts of your life, where what you're doing now?
This is by far the most rewarding
Mm-hmm.
part, being grandparents. It's the most fun because we don't have to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever work I did was part-time, and it was on my terms. Whenever I felt like working is when I worked. And of course we're fortunate to have income.
Mm-hmm.
Can't believe that we still have income 15 years, almost 16 years later.
Yeah.
And it's just the most enjoyable time. The rest of my life I found was rewarding as well,
Mm-hmm.
and enjoyable, but this is, as so many people have said before us, it's the best time.
Very good. Very good. Your how did you get connected to the Learning Center?
Our good friends, Karen and Bruce, started doing this some years ago, teaching a class in film.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're good friends, we had met them here in Savannah. They're from Boston. We came here from Cleveland, and we met up in a local club one night called Drinking Liberally, and they ended up being very, very close friends because they're also, Karen grew up in Detroit, very close to the school that Eileen, my wife, went to.
The University of Detroit.
So, she was at Marygrove College. I was at University of Detroit. They're very close. For many years, University of Detroit was men only. Her college was women only, and they had been brothers and sister schools. So we had that Detroit connection. We knew some of the same people.
Right.
So they were very close friends, and Karen and Bruce were teaching the film class at the Learning Center. So we attended their first year of teaching.
Wow.
Found it to be wonderful,
Good.
and we've continued on and found a number of the other courses to be a lot of fun too. Very in human resources as a human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And they never seemed to go away. They would always, employees would have problems with the employer, and I kept working on trying to resolve them. You think you get it resolved, and then maybe 6 months, 8 months later, it would come back again. So human resource problems, legal problems were never over. I always said when I got home and did some remodeling, if I cut a piece of lumber, it never filed an appeal. It never argued with me.
Mm-hmm.
I'd put it up, and if it didn't fit, oh well, I made a mistake. I'll cut it again and make it fit. So remodeling was always a totally different discipline. That I had total control of the project, and when it's done, I learned how to do things nicely, and I could be proud of my work, and there was never an appeal.
Okay. Right.
So it became another part of my life that fulfilled another part of my psychology,
Mm-hmm.
is to build things and make things.
Good for you. Good for
Yeah.
you. So we have covered a lot of things, and you're giving me a lot of information about you as a person. Is there anything, because you know that this is going to be kept in the archives and people can come and research and look at specific areas that they might be interested in. Is there anything that you think we haven't discussed that you might want people to know either about you or about life here or anything?
Yeah, I think to touch on our connection with Savannah now. We've become very integrated into Savannah, and I'm finding it to be a wonderful community because there's so many people that come here from all over the country, all over the world. Our daughter, for example, is teaching at the college, and she has Asian people and African people and American people from all over the country, and I'm finding that all through Savannah that our experience culturally has changed. We're meeting people of so many different cultures now. Not that we didn't before, but it seems like Savannah is a much richer community that way. So we're really feeling part of it, feeling like we're bringing something to Savannah. We've become quite involved in at least some of the politics in Savannah and some of the cultural things. I've been involved with the coalition for renaming Calhoun Square to Susie King Taylor Square. And I feel like we're actually contributing to the community and making some changes in it.
Wow.
So I feel like we're part of the growth and cultural evolution of Savannah.
That's great.
So I'm feeling it's maybe because we're at this point in our lives where we have the time to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, we had always been involved in that cultural community that we were in before, but not to as large an extent. Well, we also had work to do, had full-time jobs, and so it's rewarding. I'm glad to be. I really feel a part of Savannah.
Great. What was your role in the renaming of the square to Taylor Square?
Well, because I'm still a lawyer, the coalition had a volunteer attorney from Atlanta, and a bit of litigation started when some member of the Savannah community didn't like the idea of renaming the square and filed a lawsuit to stop the city from doing that. And the lawyer from out of town, I think actually we had met some other people who were involved in this coalition. A fellow named Mark, what was Mark's name? Name escapes me. But we had attended some of the coalition meetings, and we were familiar with the coalition to rename the square, and we'd attended some of the meetings in City Hall, some of their hearings. And then this litigation came up, and the lawyer from Atlanta said, "Hey, I need a local attorney. Would you be willing to assist in that way?" So I said, "Oh, sure." Well, I had done a little bit of legal work locally, so at least I knew how to file documents in the court locally, although this was not something I had done much of locally. But I got involved in that way, but more an assistant attorney.
All right. So you maintain, I guess, your license?
I have maintained it, and I'm still, when I finally retired from the EEOC job, I kept my license active, and it just meant paying dues. Luckily, I found out that after the age of 70, I no longer had to attend CLE, continuing legal education classes, because I had to do that during the earlier years to maintain my license.
Right.
So I could just pay my annual bar dues, and it wasn't that much, but finally
I had got to the point of going on to emeritus status with the Georgia Bar,
Wow.
which meant I didn't have to pay dues,
Great.
but I still had access to all of the privileges of membership, except that I couldn't practice. So when this litigation came up with the Susie King Taylor Square, I renewed my bar membership. Emeritus status is very nice because you can go on emeritus status, pay no dues, and if you want to reactivate, you just pay your dues and become active again.
Wow.
So I've been bouncing in and out of emeritus status
Wow.
for the last couple of years.
Which means that you can practice as a lawyer once you've paid your dues.
Well, on emeritus status, you can do pro bono work,
Oh.
but it has to be through a pro bono organization.
Oh.
So in order for me to actually do anything in court and represent a client, I have to reactivate.
Okay.
So I've done that, and now I'm at the point where I think I can go back onto emeritus status because the case is almost done.
Yes.
But
You're going to keep it for a little bit longer.
like so much litigation,
Yeah.
there's appeals, and
So that's not yet, that's not over yet?
It's not over yet.
Wow. Even though it's been renamed and
The city has done its job, and the city is doing a wonderful job. They're really the major party in the lawsuit.
yes.
The coalition to rename the square just wanted to participate to give input.
Oh, okay.
So we're still hoping it's going to be over soon this year. I think.
Well, that's very good. It's a nice thing that you're gotten involved with, and it sounds like you're a very full life. Right.
Yes, sometimes too full. I keep talking about retiring.
Yeah. Once more, right? Yeah, no, that's great. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me, and I think this is going to be wonderful for the archives to have all the things that you're talking about. So I appreciate you
I
taking
just
the time.
feel like being a thread in the fabric of the
Yes,
community.
and this is one of it. One of the ways of people to
Yeah.
figure out which thread they want to pull out and maybe read more about you. So
Okay.
this is good. Well, thank you again.
I enjoy participating.
Excellent.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you.